I'm excited to have Andy Broadbent join us today as part of the Outdoor Photo Series. As with many of our guests, Andy is a multi-talented professional photographer and is, I think, just as comfortable in the studio as he is outside of the studio. We're going to talk about all things photography and maybe focus on some fashion photography. How did you end up where you are today? You know, what got you into photography? What led you to fashion photography and portraiture photography and to kind of where you are today?
Yeah, my start was from college, I suppose. I went to college. After that, I worked for a company that was pre-press post-production. It wasn't really photography, but it was a lot of retouching and making things ready for print. I went freelance around 2010, and I was still doing predominantly post-production and graphics layout work. At that time, I bought myself my first camera, proceeded then to self-teach the photography side of things. I wanted to pretty much give a full service so I could be able to do production and post-production. And so that was my sort of employment history, if you like. And for the styles of things I do now, I'm not sure it was a purposeful path to what I'm doing now. It was just, I think I started off, when I first started doing photography, I really liked all the really heavily post-produced stuff, you know, the kind of things you'd see in Hollywood posters, a lot of composites and things like that, whereas after a while I sort of progressed and wanted to go a bit more natural, and fashion kind of things just grabbed my fancy after that.
Yeah.
And kind of that's where I am now.
Okay. And so you started your work in post-production, right? Yeah. Before you kind of got more behind the camera.
Yeah, and I still do a lot of that as well, to be honest with you. As I say, I work freelance, so the business I've got is multifaceted, and a lot of clients that I work with, they'll ask for one thing or the other. So I'll still work with a lot of marketing agencies who'll book me to do graphics layout or retouching work.
When you started, you know, your career, what kind of cameras and lenses and lighting and other gear were you using? And then talk us through maybe some of that evolution to today and what you're excited about in terms of gear, technology, cameras and lenses.
Yeah. So the first camera I got was a Canon 7D. At the time, I didn't know really that much about the camera side of things. So I asked a few people, and obviously there's the whole Canon and Nikon debate. So a lot of people had their opinions and preferences on which brand to go for. And the reason I got the 7D initially was I saw a really good deal online,
okay,
which was about 90% off. I ordered the camera, did a bit of research, found out that it was a really capable camera, and then the order got cancelled because obviously it must have been a mistake. So, but in the meantime, I had done research on the camera and it seemed really good anyway, so I just reordered it at the full retail price. So I had that 7D for probably 3 or 4 years. That's normally the cycle I have for cameras. So I had the Canon 7D and then progressed onto the Canon 5D Mark III. Then the 5D Mark IV, which I had up until December of last year. And at present now, I've got the Canon EOS are they're at the moment top of the range mirrorless camera, because I wanted to progress into that, because I just saw that I think that's the way the market and the industry will progress. So I thought I may as well be a relatively early adopter on that side of things. I think the thing when you're buying a new camera, you know, I prepare to have them for 3 or 4 years anyway. So even if it's a little bit of overkill now, within that 3 or 4 years, it might have sort of grown, you know, the industry might have caught up with it a little bit.
And do you find that the publishing of the work has also changed?
No, I pretty much use the same camera for everything. I tend to like, as I say, I've got the EOS R at the moment, which is a 30 megapixel camera. So even if I know the output is going to be small and digital, I'll often edit the image. I'll shoot and edit the images in the largest size.
Okay.
Just in case in future they do want it for print or magazine, and then you output it for whatever device it's going to go on.
How about lenses? I guess one advantage of having stuck with the same brand is that there's more compatibility of the lenses without having to use many adapters and that. How has that evolved for you, and how do you choose?
Most of I've got 3 lenses that I use most often. What they are is I have a Canon 70-200 IS 2. That I would say is the main workhorse lens I've got. If I was struggling for space in my bag, or you know, traveling for a distance and you only had a certain amount of carry-on, so I could only carry one lens, that would probably be the lens that I'd take with me. But to complement that, I've got a Tamron 24-70.
75. I have that one.
Yep. I think it's G2. I often, if I'm just doing a bit of a location scout or a recce or for personal kind of stuff, so if I was just going on holiday, I'll often take that because it's quite a versatile lens, because it can go from quite wide to a medium telephoto. I'm doing any of the underwater stuff because it's what I've got the filters for the Outex gear. Mm-hmm. And the third main one is the Sigma 85mm 1.4 arts lens. So for the 3 lenses, the 85mm, if I'm doing portrait work or beauty work, that's really good for that. Although I can still use the 70-200 for it. And the 70-200, it covers all sorts. So probably 50% of the stuff you show in there on my website and Instagram is easily done by that. And then the 24-70, anything underwater, anything when I'm on a personal holiday, a bit of a recce or...
Okay. Let me ask you a different question about style. Do you have photographers that historically have inspired you? You know, you consider yourself to have a style?
I was quite into the really heavily processed stuff back then. So back then there was there's a chap called Michael Muller, who's American. I think he's LA based, and he does a lot of the Marvel movies. He does all the poster work for all of those movies. So initially I was influenced by that, and that's why earlier in my career, or earlier in my photography life, I used more lights for things, whereas as I progressed, I probably used less strobes and flashes. So back then I'd maybe have 3-point lights, so you know, you'd get that really really edgy look. So I think he was an influence early on, but that, although he's still obviously a fantastic photographer and nothing's changed with him, my preferences changed a little bit. There's Annie Leibovitz, obviously, there's the big names, because I think with her stuff, what I like is that even when she's using strobes and artificial light, it still looks as though it's shot in natural light, or that it's shot with the available light. So she'll very skillfully mix the light in a situation so as it doesn't draw attention to itself. From my point of view, I remember asking someone actually a couple of years ago, and because I said I didn't think I had a particular style, and that person said, "Oh no, I can definitely tell when I see an image, even before I've seen the tag in it, I know that it's yours." So, and still at the time, I couldn't really put my finger on it. I think generally the thought process I've got whenever I'm doing a shoot is I like everything to sort of make sense, if you like. So, the story to make sense, the outfit and the lighting to complement the scene. Definitely get into it for the right reasons, if you've got an actual passion for it, because it can be a frustrating thing to get into. There's a lot of, even if you're quite artistic, there's a lot of hustle involved. You've got to pitch to clients, you've got to pick up the phone to ring clients. There's lots of work on the back end where you're backing up images, editing images, liaising on shoots. So it's not all, there's a beach shot there. It's not all being on beaches with pretty people and playing in the surf. There's a lot of hard work involved. So I'd say just obviously be prepared for the slog.
Are there stories that you can share with us about a shoot where you encountered unforeseen situations?
Most of the time things go relatively smoothly. If you're quickly swapping from one location to another, like I was in Miami at the end of 2018, we went quickly from the street to the beach, and it had been raining, and the day was quite a lot cooler, and we went from sort of one temperature to another. So the lens I was using just all fogged up on the inside of the lens. Well, I had to that's why I said before, I tend to always carry a couple of lenses. So the other lens I hadn't fogged up, so I had to change that lens over for the other one. That's why it's always a good idea to have two lenses. That also happened to me the only time I've ever done a wedding. That quick change in temperature can affect your lenses. The things that go wrong for me are generally something to do with if I'm using strobe lights. So sometimes if the trigger isn't working, or there's some sort of compatibility issue. But again, that's the other thing I'd say about advice to people getting in photography. Troubleshooting is part of it as well. I tend to carry a speed light with me. Not that I rarely use speed lights for the purpose they're used for, but if I do have problems with remote controls for strobes, you can often set the strobe light to an optical slave and use your speed light to trigger it. So that's why I often carry a speed light with me. And then if all else fails lighting wise, become good at shooting in natural light. I really wanted to pick up the knowledge of how to use flashlights and speed lights, whereas I think you're better off just learning the full capabilities of your camera and getting good with natural light. The thing that took me a little bit of time to get used to working outdoors, certainly anywhere in a public area, is you've got to get over any sort of shyness or embarrassment because people will often come over and interrupt you, and people are stopping to stop and stare. You've got to just block that out. You know, I've often on outdoor shoots, I'll get people coming up to me or trying to speak to the model, you know, asking, what's this for? Are you famous? You know, am I going to see this in a magazine? Where can I look out for it? I've had people ask the model for an autograph, even though the model isn't particularly high profile. I think they're just taking the chances just in case. At the end of 2018, before I went to Miami, I was in LA, and there was a guy there who tried to hijack my shoot. He said it was his last day in LA. He'd been unable to get a model, so he said, "Oh, can I borrow your model?" Well, no, not really.
No.
Yeah, if you're used to working in studio under a totally controlled light system, learn how to mix lights. You know, so obviously you can go out, and if you've got the perfect day, you can perhaps use the natural light as it stands without too much modification. But there'll often be days when the light outside is quite tricky, so you might have to supplement it with either a big reflector or a light on low power. So again, a big thing with me is I don't like drawing attention to the actual use of studio lights outdoors, so I'll often just put them on a low power just as a bit of a fill flash. So yeah, I'd certainly get adept with that mixing of the light.
How often, as a commercial photographer, do you have to adapt? Because I imagine that a lot of the work requires, you know, scouting, planning, you think through the locations. And so how often do you have to improvise, or do you have a brief that calls for a location that maybe you don't have a lot of time or a lot of access to, that you have to sort of make it work quickly? Is that common, and are there many examples of that?
Yeah, very common. You know, as soon as you step out of the studio, you're open to the elements. So even if you've sufficiently scouted the area you're at, as I say, the weather can change, or there can be all sorts of outside influences that can trip you up. So it's always good to have a plan B in your head. I'll often, even if the client has got, if they've supplied a brief and the location, a mood board of my own in the bank as well, just in case something goes wrong or doesn't quite go to plan. You've often got to think on your feet. I think there was a shoot I did in South Africa last year. So with that one, there was literally no preparation for it. So I'd spoken to the client before, but we had never actually worked together as such. They noticed that was in South Africa, and they had some of their products there. It was an apparel, sporting apparel. So they contacted me and said, "We've got some gear over there. Can you shoot a bit of a mini campaign for us?" So literally in the space of a couple of hours, I had to speak to a model, pick up the gear from, it was an assistant they had over there, do a bit of a mini location scout, shoot the stuff and get it back to the client. So yeah, you don't always have a brief from the client, and sometimes you do have to deviate as well because of the conditions.
Mm-hmm. Is the adaptness of the model to the conditions, right? So if you're talking about underwater, it takes a special kind of model. How often do you work with models that you have to coach through? You know, how much variability is there?
Most of the time, the casting of the model is done by the client. So, you know, I've not always got an input into that in advance. So,
okay,
often for that side of things, you've not got much control over it. Then it's just a matter of you've got to work with them and get what you need to get. So that same trip in South Africa last year, I remember as quite a good example of sometimes the problems you can face. I had two models that I was shooting. One was a really fair-haired model with fine blonde hair, and the other model was of Greek descent. She had really thick, dark hair, and it was a super windy day. So a lot of the time I had to focus more on the dark-haired model because her hair wasn't getting blown all over the place. Whereas the blonde model, hers was really out of control. So if you've got good makeup and hair on set, that's obviously always a good thing. So you can then liaise with the hair artist and ask them to, as long as it doesn't contravene the brief, you know, you can ask them maybe to tie the hair, or, you know, obviously spray. You know, you can put some product in it to control it a little bit better. I'm a little bit biased when I say this because I've come from a post-production pre-press background, but I'd certainly advise any photographer, whether they're a beginner or intermediate or even, you know, even good photographers, if they've got no knowledge of Photoshop and editing, I'd at least learn how to get by, you know, just to do basic edits, because it does. Good editing can take an average image to an amazing image.
How much does the retouching play a part in your body of work? How much of that is a part of your body of work? Do you prefer to keep it simple and natural to match your photography style?
With the editing side of things, I'd say 95% of the shots that I shoot, I'll edit in some way. But so I'll always try and get the shot as close as possible on set, even though that I know what I can do at the back end. And sometimes there can be a, you know, you could be tempted to be lazy, you know, on set. So sometimes if there's a label showing on some apparel, and you know, in the back of your head you might think, oh, I can sort that out in Photoshop. But if the client is editing, or you are editing 20 images from that set and they've all got the label showing, it would have been a lot easier to just tuck it in. You know, it would have taken you 2 seconds on set, and it's going to take you however long on the back end. If you just stop on that image that you've got there, that's going to disagree with what I say a little bit. So normally I like to just give myself an easy life in the editing side of things. So I'll try and get everything right on set. That shot in particular was one where I kind of did rely on the retouching skill quite a lot, but I knew that as I was shooting it. Basically, we were at a beach in LA and we were really running out of light. You know, obviously you can see that it's close to sunset there.
Yep.
And it was just myself, the model, and a makeup artist, and that was up on some rocks. So we left the makeup artist down on the beach. So we didn't have anyone to hold even a reflector. So what I did with that shot, because we still wanted to retain a realistic sunset, is I shot that about 2 stops underexposed, knowing that I could really pull a lot of detail out in the raw file.
Right.
Explain that to the model as well. You know, I said to her, look, you've got to trust me on this one. I'm going to shoot it super dark, but it's just so as I can keep that sunset in the background. And I said I can really pull up the brightness in Lightroom or Capture One, and then obviously refine it in Photoshop.
Does it happen often that you share, let's say, most of the images with the client? I assume that you do some selection.
Yeah.
And kind of walk us through the selection process. Does it happen often that the client ends up choosing images that you did not think they were going to pick? Like you give them 10 shots and you think for sure these 4 are going to be the top 4, and they end up going with the ones that you thought were not the top 4.
Generally, my process at the end of a shoot, it's pretty consistent depending on the kind of shoot I do. So if it's a model test, a model portfolio, a client job, get the images onto the computer as soon as possible because I'm paranoid about backups. So I get it onto the computer straight away, get it into Capture One, that's the program that I usually use. And then I go through and do a quick cull of, I get rid of all the images. So all of the unusable ones, I delete straight away. From that, I tend to make my selections, even if the final choice is going to go to the client or the model, I'll make my selections, and then I give them the option of either seeing everything from the shoot, apart from the ones that I've deleted because they're unusable, or do they want to see my sort of mini selection, and then they choose theirs from that selection. I might send to the client or the model maybe 100 images, and then they choose their 5, 10, 15, 20 images out of that bunch. Shouldn't give my secrets away, but sometimes I might do it. If I've got a particular favourite, I might tweak it a little bit before I send it to them. You know, to maybe influence them to
stack the deck in your favor.
Yeah, a little bit. Probably at least 60 or 70% of the time, the client or the customer tends to choose ones that that weren't my favourites. You know, that I think would have been the second rung, if you like. You know, the standout ones that I really liked.
It's been so much fun. Time flies.
Yeah, that's gone fast. It's gone really fast.
Thank you so much for joining us. So if people didn't get their questions answered, they can go to andybroadbent.com and also find you on Instagram. I'll post the links on our feed. And, you know, people can also post questions there or reach out, and we'll make sure that those get answered.